Hello, everybody, and it is our Facebook Live. I'm Tanya Williams, as you know, and I'm coming from Cape Town. It's a beautiful day here. And today we have Tiffany with us. She is a pediatric occupational therapist with many more other things behind her name, which I'm going to find out a little bit more about now. She's just been telling me some lovely stories. Today is a very, very special broadcast. We're going to be looking at brain breaks. What are they? Why are they good for our children, and how do we implement them into our daily learning routines with our kids? But before we do that, I would like to say, guys, at the end of this video or at the end of this presentation, if you stay to the end, I'm going to be making a little special announcement about what's to come tomorrow. So stay tuned. And without further ado, Tiffany, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, Tanya. Thanks for having me. It's
great pleasure. Yeah. So, Tiffany, tell me a little bit about your background. You are an OT, a pediatric OT, but you were telling me some interesting stories now about ballet school. Tell me about that.
Yes. So I'm an OT by trade, but I grew up in a family that really valued ballet. So I did it. I went to a studio in Johannesburg. I grew up in Johannesburg, and I went to art school. So I went to the National School of the Arts, and I majored in dance. So did that along with the academics. And then I danced with the South African Ballet Theatre professionally for a year. Wow. And then I just decided it wasn't for me. And I knew my best friend's mom was an OT, and I knew that she worked from home and she saw children, and I thought, okay, this is something that I could do. Moved to Cape Town and then studied OT at UCT. And after graduation, I did a year's community service in a small little town in Mpumalanga called Lydenburg. Incredible experience. I absolutely loved it. I learned so much working kind of in a smaller district hospital, which was the kind of experience that I hadn't had before. And then I moved back to Cape Town, and jobs were scarce at the time as OTs, and you kind of took the job that you could get, whether it was in the field you wanted or not. And I landed up doing quite a bit of work in private hospitals, in adult rehabilitation. And then I found my way to pediatrics, and I always knew that I wanted to work with children. I found it was a much more positive experience. You know, you were giving a child something that they hadn't yet achieved, and you weren't necessarily, working with adults who had lost something. And I've worked in various settings, mostly school-based OT. I've worked in other practices for other people. And so I've been in private practice for almost 10 years, and pediatrics for about 8 years. And I absolutely love it. So I work with children of all ages, children who have quite serious diagnoses, and also children who are just, struggling with simple things like, let's say, handwriting or simple gross motor skills. And yeah, that's my background, and I currently have my own practice. I'm not practicing at the moment.
That's hello.
Yeah, hello. I feel like that because COVID, you could use so many sentences because COVID. So I'm in Johannesburg at the moment with my family, but I also work for.
You have a little girl, right?
I do, yes, yeah. And she is 3.5. Her name is Holly, and yeah. That's me, basically.
Fantastic. And I've just been blown away as a practitioner in gymnastics and kids fitness and movement exercise with kids, which is also my passion. I've been involved for 40 years, and you've come into my life and you said, but hang on, Tanya, a jumping jack is not just a jumping jack. And I'm like, what is a jumping jack, Tiffany? And you tell me these things that it's doing for the brain. And I'm like, wow, that has opened my eyes to some things that I didn't even know the value of what we are actually often doing with our children. And hence this program today, to bring it to our fellow exercise practitioners and to bring that OT perspective and the perspective that you're so clued up on, which is what is it actually doing for our children when they are actually doing these exercises. And specifically, we're going to be talking and jumping right in to brain breaks. And Tiffany, tell me, what are brain breaks? It's this catchword, it's this word that everyone uses, but do we really know what it is? Tell me what it is.
Yeah. So, back to what you said about movement. A lot of times parents will say to me, the child will come to me for handwriting issues, and they'll say, but why aren't you sitting down and actually doing handwriting with my child? Why have you got my child in the gym, and why have you got them moving? So that really is about, why your type of programs that you run, such as Fitnastics and Gym Wizards, they really do actually benefit things in the classroom, like the link between a jumping jack and, for example, being able to cut on the line. So to brain breaks, it really, I think the word brain break, it isn't necessarily a break per se, because movement actually stimulates the brain. So a brain break, in a simple definition, is a short period of movement, of purposeful movement, that you'll do. So let's say, I say maximum 5 minutes, that you can implement within a daily routine, so in the classroom or while your child's doing homework, so that it gives their brain a break from the classwork type of work, that more mundane work, and allows them to have a moment of movement that will re-energize the brain, that will help them to focus when they sit back down. And in doing them regularly will actually create connections in the brain that are going to help their functional skills or the demands placed on them in the classroom. And I think we really need to, you said there, you spoke about the brain, and it really does, it's all about the brain. And that's essentially what a brain break is. And it's relevant to children, but it's also relevant to adults, I think, especially because we are now in current times spending a lot of our time sitting in front of a computer, looking at a screen, not moving our bodies. And I think we've all experienced that virtual fatigue. It's an actual thing. Everybody says, I've been on Zoom for 5 hours, I feel so tired. You really do. And part of the reason is because you're not moving in the same way that perhaps you would in your original working environment. So that's essentially what a brain break is. Short, purposeful movement.
So that, okay. And why, tell me as a layperson, why are they so important? What do they actually do to the brain? And you mentioned, I know in past discussions with me, the vestibular system and the proprioceptive systems, and these two big systems that really, really need to be fine-tuned as such to allow our children to actually function optimally and academically in the classroom or online these days, because they're doing their classes online. So tell me why are brain breaks and this type of activity so important for the children?
Okay, so I think to first understand that question, we have to understand the human brain. And as you are talking to me now, and as we function in our daily lives, the brain is taking in information from our senses and processing that information, and that understanding of that sensory input informs our response, or the way that we respond to that sensory information. So you're crossing a road, somebody hits a hooter, that sound makes you turn your head to look. It's as simple as that, and it's really how we function in our daily lives. And what movement actually does is it creates pathways in our brain. It creates pathways between areas in our brain. And those pathways are initially laid down by movement. So if you think of a baby or a really young child, they move and the brain feels that movement. They sense the movement through their balance organs and through your muscles, and that creates pathways in the brain. And that's really, the term is called neuroplasticity, or you can think of it as like a moldability of the brain. And that means that our brains can change. So when we're born, our brain is the only organ in our body that's not fully developed. So it's not, for example, like, being born with a small hand and then it turns into a big hand. It's almost like being born without fingers and then your fingers grow based on how you move your hand. So the brain only starts developing in our late 20s. And the most prolific period of growth happens in childhood. So whatever your child experiences, that wires the brain. And when I say experiences, I'm really talking about the sensory information that they receive, and mostly the information they receive through movement. So, and those experiences create, neural pathways between, let's say, the left and right side of the brain. And those neural pathways, although they are originally created by movement and maintained by skillful and purposeful movement, they are the exact same pathways we use to read or to write or to color or cut. So that's why a jumping jack equals better cutting, because it creates neural pathways in your child's brain that they use for learning. And so we'll talk about those two systems. The first system is called the vestibular system. And this is really essentially our system in our body that tells our brain about how our body is moving. So acceleration, deceleration. It tells us about spatial orientation. And it all has to do with the movement of the head. So deep in our inner ear, we have a little structure, a tiny little organ called the semicircular canals, and another organ called the otolith cells. And what happens is, as we move our head, there's liquid inside that organ and little hairs that sway with the liquid. And the swaying of those hairs sends a neural signal to our brain that we can understand. For example, I'm being pushed over this way. That liquid moves in my brain, in my ear, goes to my brain and says, oh, hang on, you're falling over this way. So that your brain can send a message to the muscles that will keep you upright. So in doing so, the vestibular system is all about balance. It also helps us to control our eye movements when we are moving. And that's why it's easier to balance if you focus on a single spot with your eyes, and harder to balance if your eyes are closed. And it really also affects our posture. So that's the vestibular system, but it works really closely with another system called our proprioceptive system. And an easier term to remember for this is really about our understanding or feeling our body positions. So deep inside our muscles and inside our joints are little receptors that send a message back to our brain about, when our muscles contract, when they stretch, and the position of our joints. So for example, as we're all looking at each other on the screen right now, it's the sense of you know whether your knees are bent or straight or crossed. You're not looking at them, but you can feel it. It's almost like an unconscious awareness of your body position. And those two systems work together to inform coordinated and purposeful movement. And when we stimulate those systems, we stimulate the motor skills that those systems are the foundation of, or that they underlie. So when we created these brain breaks, we were looking for two things. First, I was looking for the type of movement that helps a child to focus. So the kind of movement that's regulating. And those two sensory systems have an effect on our self-regulation. So for example, that proprioceptive system, which we really get through weight-bearing movements or any kind of active movement of the body, that is a regulating sense. It's the type of sense that helps us to get into the zone for learning, where we can focus on what's important and eliminate what's not important, so we don't get distracted, basically.
So give me an example. If a child does something like what movement to stimulate that proprioceptive thing, their chances of focus when they sit down again and go and actually do something that requires focus is that much better. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So I'll give you an example. So the vestibular system works in the same way. Certain input into the vestibular system can be calming and regulating. So a simple thing like jumping.
Mm-hmm.
right? As you jump off the ground, let's say you're doing jumping jacks. That's our
Mm-hmm.
example we'll stick with it, because jumping jacks does a lot of things.
Yes.
So as you jump up and down, your head is moving up and down, so you're stimulating the vestibular
The,
system.
yeah, yes.
Yes, absolutely. Your brain can actually feel that you are moving up and down. And
Right.
then as you land into the ground, you're receiving deep pressure into your joints and muscles. You're getting proprioceptive input. And what that does is it brings our neural system into the right state of arousal where we can really focus. So that's why, let's say you're sitting in a classroom and you can see your students are yawning, they're starting to distract each other,
Mm-hmm.
they're getting a little bit fidgety. Jump up, do a couple of star jumps or jumping jacks. It really drills into that neural pathway or into those systems in the brain. And then you can sit back down and you can actually focus. And so they
It's
are regulated
amazing.
in nature. Yeah, it really is. And I think, that's why I find if I have done a gym class in the morning, that I have a better day at work.
Yes,
I can
definitely.
focus better. And that's exactly why, because it taps into those neural systems or those sensory systems that help you to focus. They naturally just help you to focus.
But the beauty of the brain breaks is that you don't have to go to a gym, or you don't have to do like a whole hour in one compressed time. You can do these little brain breaks throughout the whole day and get major benefit for each section. So you do your brain break exercise, and then you can focus. And then you do your brain break
Absolutely.
exercise, and then you can focus. And the cool
Yeah.
thing about that is that that's beautiful for children because they can't concentrate for that long period of time. They need those breaks. And,
Yeah.
and they need that brain to be stimulated in a different way to what they're being stimulated with the academics. Is that a correct sort of
Absolutely.
summary almost?
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like if you think of feeding the brain, it's like snacking keeps you fuller for longer. Small snacks throughout the day as opposed to big meals. It works exactly in that way for children. As well, we don't have children are doing extramurals, they're doing this class, that class, they're doing homework. They don't have the time to sit and do an hour-long gym class that's not necessarily within their routine that they already have. So
Right.
they quick little movements, because we also don't want to get to the point where we do so much movement that it actually does the opposite effect and then they can't concentrate. And
Because
that's
they're
why we keep
fatigued.
them, yeah, they're tired. They've actually overstimulated those two sensory systems that they actually can't focus.
See, and the beauty also, Tiffany, is that the teachers can do this in the classroom.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
and what I love about your brain break, and this brings us into the next section, which is how to implement, because kids get bored, and we don't want to just do jumping jacks every day. You've got to be so creative about what kind of brain break exercises you do, and this is where I'm blown away with the ones. And I mean, if you can just quickly outline the 10 that you went through, just to give the people an idea of the kind of exercises they could do.
yeah,
And of course,
absolutely.
at the end of this, we will be talking a little bit more about how people can see those exercises for themselves with their own two eyes and the opportunities around this kind of exercise. But we'll get to that later. Tell me a little
Yeah.
bit more about how, if I'm a teacher in a classroom, give me some ideas that
Yeah.
you've got.
So I think the first thing is to notice when your child needs a brain break. And you can either catch it, you can schedule these movements into your day regardless of how your children are focusing. It's really a classroom management tool, a brain break. So you can say, okay, every hour we're going to do a brain break, regardless of how your children are focusing. And it's almost that idea of snacking where you're going to give them a snack before they get hungry. So before your children start to fall apart because they've been sitting and concentrating for so long, you've put it in every hour, for example, and your child can literally stand up where they are. They don't need to, we don't do partner work because COVID. And they can use items in front of them. So an item of stationery or their chair. And the brain breaks are designed in a way that you're not doing the exact movement for 3 or 5 minutes because children find that boring. You also including moving to a beat, which includes rhythm and time. listening skills. So we've added a metronome, we've added a bit of music every now and again, and we've also given them varying degrees of difficulty.
That's
So
brilliant, because of course you got different ages. So yeah.
Absolutely. And a 4-year-old can't do what a 9-year-old can do.
Right.
So we've done 10 of them. And in those 10, I've really tried to focus on various skills. The first is to give lots of vestibular and proprioceptive input. So we're building the foundation. But those two senses are the foundation for other motor skills that impact on learning. So
Like
for
what?
example, so the concept of having a strong core or a strong tummy. Your child needs a strong tummy and a strong shoulders, strong tummy, strong back to be able to sit up and focus on the teacher's lesson. Because the brain only has enough power to focus on one or two things. Essentially, actually, there's new research that's come out that really your brain can actually only focus properly and 100% on one thing. So if your child...
I know why my brain, I can't get anything.
and also this whole idea, or this thing of multitasking being something we work towards, actually our brains don't function that well. So when your brain is trying to focus on keeping your core balanced, so core strength helps with balance, and balance is another one of the things we've looked at in these brain breaks. Your brain doesn't have enough capacity to focus on your teacher's lesson. And that's why you might see your child fidgeting, and because they're trying to get that sensory input that helps them to balance. They're looking at their friends. They can't focus on the teacher because the brain is using too much power to focus on keeping them still and upright. So we worked on core strength. We worked quite a bit on balance. So one of the nice core strength exercises we've done, I'll go back to core strength, is our chair exercises, where your child can just pop their chair out, sit on their chair and do little exercises for their tummies. No, but you'll hear me saying in these brain breaks, keep your tummy and your back strong all the time, because it really is the foundation of skilled movement, is a strong center. It's like a tree with a strong trunk that can blow really nicely in the wind versus a tree with like a piddly little weak, trunk that blows over in the wind and you can't use your arms nicely. So we focus on
nice to give to the parents, the teachers, and the children that strong tree trunk.
Yeah. And also on that analogy, if you think of a tree with a strong trunk and its branches can move nice and freely, it's the same thing with a human body, that your fine motor skills or your use of your arms, like coloring, writing, all those kinds of things will be easier when you have a strong core.
Right.
Yeah. So, and another thing we've worked on is balance. So you'll see a lot of the movements that we do involve balancing on one foot. We've got a little yoga section that is calming in stressful times because COVID, but also that works on balance. Yeah, absolutely. And I think our children are really feeling it. Yeah,
they do.
They absolutely are. I mean, I can see it with my daughter. Yeah. It's been a stressful time, So the brain breaks focus quite a lot on balance. So core strength, balance. We also focus a lot on something called bilateral integration, or another word that people say is bilateral coordination. This is a really important one because we've got the left side of the brain that controls the right side of the body, and the same is true for the right side of the brain controlling the left side. And between the two sides of our brain, we have this structure called the corpus callosum, which is almost like, it's like a superhighway between the two sides of our brain. Now, in order to function in everyday life, we have to use our whole brain. We don't just use one side and just use the other. And it's about those neural connections. So when we do tasks that use both sides of our body, so for example, we'll use jumping jacks again, which I've included in our dance party brain break. You'll see some jumping jacks.
That's a cool one. Yes, that music's so cool. Really jumping in my chair like this.
Yeah, really, really cool. So bilateral tasks are tasks that use both sides of the body at the same time, either symmetrically or asymmetrically. And what that does is it creates neural pathways between that corpus callosum, almost like creating more lanes on that superhighway. Because in tasks like the reading, or
Yes.
writing a creative story, or children who are acquiring the skill of just learning to talk. It uses both sides of the brain. Because the right side of the brain involves creativity, imagination. So let's use the example of writing a creative story, which is a requirement as you get, I'd say, I know the curriculum really well, having worked in schools for grade 3. At about grade 3, you start to really write more creative stories. And so the right side of the brain is more the creative and arty side, and the left side of the brain is the more kind of problem solving and mathematical and academic side of the brain. But to write a creative story, you need to use both things. You need to be creative, but you also need to understand writing and language. So if you're doing jumping jacks, you're creating connections between the two sides of the brain, and those are the same connections that your child will use when they are acquiring language, writing a creative story, learning mathematics. So
And the eyes, about the eyes.
yeah. So another thing that is quite closely linked to bilateral integration is crossing the midline. So
Yes.
we have this imaginary midline in our body, and so crossing the midline means either your arm or your leg or your eyes need to move into the space of the other side. That also creates neural pathways between both sides of the brain. And it allows us to move in a way that crosses our midline. So when you speak of eye movement, which we know is controlled by the vestibular system and the proprioceptive system, if you are reading from the left side of the page to the right, or if you are following your teacher as she's giving instructions and walking across the room, your eyes need to cross the midline. You'll only do so smoothly if you have those connections between right and left side of the brain. So a child who doesn't have those connections, or perhaps those connections are not as strong as we want them to be, they will struggle to cross their midline, and they will read across the page and they'll get to the middle and the eyes will flick and they will lose their place.
And then
Or
they
they
have
will
to find
listen.
their place again.
They have to find their place again. And then you're seeing problems with
Yeah.
reading.
Yeah.
So a lot of our activities involve crossing the midline. We've got cross toe touches, we've got cross marches, we've got cross boxing, cross kicks, lots of stuff that crosses the midline. So you might find that a
Really.
simple thing of touching your opposite shoulder or touching your opposite knee is actually going to help your child with reading. And that's that connection between movement and school. But we also need to think that a lot of tasks outside of school, so we can't only look at children in the classroom. We need to look at children in all the roles that they play. Tying your shoelaces. You need to cross, our fingers are only crossing the midline, but you need to cross the midline. Using a knife and fork, we'll step back to bilateral skills, bilateral integration. Cutting your left hand, or depending on the dominance of your hand, your stabilizing hand will hold the page and your other hand has to cut, and they have to work together to do these skillful movements. So when your child is doing jumping jacks, you're helping them to use a knife and fork. Oh, can you hear the thunder? Johannesburg summer.
Wow, Joburg.
Joburg summer here. So when you're doing jumping jacks, you're helping your child to read. You're helping your child to use a knife and fork, to tie their shoelaces, to do their buttons, to write a creative story, to concentrate on their teacher.
Incredible.
So we've looked, yeah, it really is. And that's why in the gym, when I'm seeing children who have sensory processing issues that are affecting their writing, that's why I'm actually doing movement with them, and I'm not sitting down at a desk and doing writing. It's almost like, if you have a headache and you take a painkiller, you're just treating the symptom. You're not finding the root of the headache or the cause of the headache.
Wow.
It's that exact concept.
This has been absolutely mind-blowing and fantastic, and it just, for me, what it does is, besides the idea of the brain breaks, which brings it into digestible parts for the children, I know that the classes that we give are doing such good things, because we cover all these things. We cover the core, we cover the balance, we cover the crossing the midline, we cover the bilateral integration, the proprioceptive system and the vestibular systems are being constantly stimulated. And we know that, there's so many more social and emotional benefits as well to movement that we haven't even covered here. But I just want to thank you for bringing this and for integrating, should I say, what we know, what we've been doing, and the knowledge that you have of the child's developing brain, because it is fantastic. So I want to thank you. We're gonna start closing our session here, unless you have anything more that you'd like to add right now. But it's been absolutely mind blowing.
Yeah, no, I have nothing else to add. Just that, the kind of work that you do is really great. And without knowing it, you're actually creating these connections and helping children to function better inside and outside of the classroom. Yeah,
And now we're doing it consciously, because we're
absolutely.
bringing your
Absolutely.
expertise into this. So thank you for that. And for those of you that stay to the end, there's going to be a very special link below. It's called go.fitnastics.com. It's a webinar that I'm doing tomorrow night, Thursday. That's the 17th. And it is at 8 o'clock South African time in the evening. So you make yourself a cup of tea, you put your kids to bed, and you get onto that webinar, because I'm going to be telling you more about how to incorporate this kind of information and these opportunities that Tiffany's been speaking about into your practice, and how to actually make money from this kind of knowledge, this kind of opportunity. And if you're in a business or you're just starting out, you're welcome to come and have a listen, and let's see where we can help you integrate this kind of amazing information into your program. Tiffany,
Great.
thank you once again, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks for having me, Tanya. Cheers.
Bye.